and then after that it said, Haim Amru Shloshim Dvarim. We didn't go into that. We won't do that today. That will belong to the next year. All right? So I'm just going to go back again to discuss some basic ideas that have to do with the Shalshelis, with the line, the chain of command, the chain of the tradition, which starts with Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai and goes, including down to Knesset Torah. Right? I wanted to begin with the introduction here that Rabbi Professor Avraham who wrote a beautiful sefer on Pirkei called Visions of the Fathers, has an opening essay here, which I think is appropriate to the whole sefer Avos. But of course, you know, he's brilliant, he's wonderful, he's a man of medicine, he's Hasidic Rebbe, he's all talents rolled into one. And his words are always meaningful. Okay? So let me begin. So I first he makes the following point. You know, he says, when the mission starts, what is he telling us? The truth of the matter is that most of the halacha, most of the dinner we keep, we will never know. We will never know what they're all about. We would never know that we have to do it. It would never occur to anyone. Why? Because they come from the Torah, and the Torah didn't give us any reasons. In other words, most of them are chukim. Most of the things that we keep are chukim. In other words, Shabbos, we keep Shabbos. Posting the Torah doesn't give you a reason why Shabbos is good for you. Kashrus, Torah doesn't tell you why kosher food is better than not kosher. Most of the halachas, shofar, sukkah, whatever you want, our halachas we would never have thought of on our own, so we need a Torah. So the question now is, says Rabbi Tversky, but ethics, behavior, you need a Torah for that. Aren't there some things that make sense on their own? If you didn't have a mitzvah, kibbutz avim, would you think it's okay to abuse your parents, etc., 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 etc.? So you would have thought that for that you don't need a Torah. But that's it's enough if you have your own good intelligence will lead to that. So first he says, the Mishnah says no. What does the Mishnah say? Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai. Everything that we're talking about has its source in Sinai, including midas Torahs, including human character, human personality, because these are not things we think of our own. And he gives a beautiful example of how the attitude to life changed in 100 years. Take the 20th century, beginning of the 1900s till the end of the century. Look at what took place, he says, in human thinking and the way we approach people and life itself. In other words, let's put it this way. Let's put it this way. He said, decades ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago, if someone would have suggested terminating a pregnancy, terminating abortion, the world was taken aback. Abortion, to stop a child coming into the world, what kind of happened is that? If someone would have talked about something called a physician-assisted suicide, a doctor can help you leave the world, you're looking at crazy. A doctor's job is to save life, Hippocratic oath. He's here to bring life into the world, not to watch you go out, and so on and so on and so forth, he says. So what happened, it says, in this century that we're talking about, you know what happened? Do we need anyone to tell us he can't kill? Isn't that logical? And so on, okay. Enough examples. And furthermore, there's a Gemara in Erevin that says, if the Torah had not been given, we could have learned much of human character from the animal world. In other words, from cats, from ants, and from doves. We could have learned our hearts. So we could learn our hearts from nature. So we need a looking for it. And the concept of Pirkei Avos is to the contrary. What's Pirkei Avos saying? Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai. This is halacha. This is halacha like everything else is halacha. And you could not depend on yourself reaching that conclusion. And listen to his fascinating reasoning. Says Rabbi Avraham Tversky, Professor Avraham, he says, let's start the first example he gave. Ending a non-life-threatening pregnancy. In other words, an abortion, what called. Would have thought it was ridiculous. No one would have thought it made sense, etc., etc. The world realized it's tantamount to murder. Killing a baby who's about to be born, there's no reason it shouldn't be born. It's tantamount to murder. And not today, in today's world, which is only half a century later, not only is it not murder, but according to many states in the United States, it's legal. It's legal. You have laws to protect the right of a mother to do what she wants with her pregnancy. And she is the boss of her body, etc., etc. So how does something change in a matter of decades that being regarded as an absolute crime to something which is perfectly possible? All right. In other words, a physician-assisted suicide, as I said before, it's a steer in essence, Hippocratic oath. You're here to protect life. You're here to create life. You're not here to end life. All right. And today you have states in America who pass laws about that too. You can do that too. And it's a dialogue going on all over the world today. In other words, radical shifts of attitudes, radical shifts take place in decades. In decades, not one decade, but in decades. Says Professor Torkins, I thought that's the gist of this introduction of his. You know what he says? He says, before the world that we lived in 100 years ago, let's say, was another world, because the life expectancy of the average person in the Western world was in the beginning of the century 40 years. A 40-year-old man was his own. So in other words, if a man lived to be 40 years, okay, it's a short life. And besides that, not only was it a short life, infant mortality, children died in childbirth, babies didn't make it to this world, etc., etc. And there were many diseases that have since been conquered, childhood diseases, tuberculosis, and so on and so forth. Right? In other words, the world needed people. The most valuable commodity in the world was people. Hence, to do anything to harm people would have been inconceivable and not an ideal. So you could have said, in such a world, maybe the midas, you didn't have to be Allah. Just look what happened in 50 years. In 50 years, he says, things have changed. Things have changed. First of all, people live today around 80, probably getting closer to 90 in this decade of ours today. In other words, people are living much longer, and guess what? There are any problems. But people are living much longer, and the price of living is very expensive. The price of medicine is prohibitive, and medical aids drive you crazy. Social Security in America, young people are paying, believing full well there won't be anything to cover them when they reach old age. And all of a sudden, something's happened. Watch something happen. A person has lost his value. We look at people. We're not showing the people as the world was, and we look at people with different eyes. And how many questions, and even in the free world, how often we get a question, can we turn off a machine because there's no quality of life? Who would have thought such a thing? If Hashem gives life, you're going to end it. Hashem always says, because the guy is sick, you want to stop him. What are you talking about? In other words, our whole value to life it's changed, and therefore what would have been obvious in the last century is not obvious now. And if we look at our own devices, you don't know where we go. You don't know what decisions we have reached. Then he goes on to say, I just said it a minute ago. In other words, terminating the life of the elderly, right? You know, some people think it's a luxury. We don't have enough beds, enough hospitals to keep old people going as long as they can. Must we? It's an imperative. If you believe Moshe Kibbutz Torah, there's no question about these things. It's all halacha. It's all halacha. It's all right and wrong. And the Torah comes along and says, Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. There is a right and wrong in Judaism which comes from Sinai. A right and wrong, no one can change. It's the bottom line. The bottom line is the Torah comes from Hashem, therefore the values don't change as Hashem doesn't change, and nobody can change it. Nobody, no person would work HaKodesh can change halacha, change the Torah. Not one word. And so this is the first point the Rish is making. Moshe Kibul Torah in Sinai, etc., Yeshua, and this is a ongoing chain of Jewish of halakha. From Hashem, the word of Hashem continues. Rabbi, what's his name? He has an article here. Let me see if I can find it. Rabbi Beryl Wine, I mentioned it the other day. Let me just say a word or two. I'll give you. Berwine begins his Adoma by saying Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. It sets down a principle, an important principle. What is that? It's not man's conscience that's going to decide right and wrong. Right and wrong is not in your mind. Right is not up to you. I mean, you can do what you want, of course. At the end of the day, there's something called freedom of choice. But right and wrong is not in your domain. This is Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. This is when the Torah came down. And that went against all theories of the Enlightenment. All the Enlightenment in Europe that goes back for centuries and centuries believed that things are relative. The human mind can make decisions, etc. He goes into principle of philosophy. Anyhow, but this is when the mission begins, in the world there was something called culture. Culture was beautiful. And as a matter of fact, it was Greek culture. Greek culture from the period 300 BC, it's a long time ago, the Greek culture fixed itself up, gave itself a good face. It had ideas on philosophy, language, astronomy, physics, architecture, theater, drama, and government structures, how you build the government. Greece was the basis of human civilization. They also had a morality that wasn't ours. And the morality was the opposite of Judaism. They believed in paganism. They believed in sexual promiscuity. They believed in violence and abuse, especially against slaves and women. So on the one hand, they stood for beauty, a lot of wonderful ideas that people embraced, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, they stood for things where Mamash Shilei. So the Mishnah starts by saying, Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. Let's get it straight. One thing over here. Right and wrong is not what the Greeks think. And the Greeks, of course, many Jews were Hellenized and joined up with the Greeks and wanted to underline Torah. But what happened is, as you know from history, that our ancestors, our predecessors, were prepared to go to war, even against Jews. Against the Hellenists who were Jews, they were prepared to war, they were prepared to kill them. The Maccabees fought whoever they had to fight. In other words, we made it clear that our concept of morality is not subject to anybody's opinion, and therefore this is the beginning of all this over here. From Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai, the Antichrist idolatry, all this is being stressed and underlined again and again. That we have a morality which goes back to Hashem. We have a basic Jewish morality which doesn't change. No matter how the situation changes, it doesn't change. Now, first, he makes another nice point over here. that what we have over here is the relationship between Moshe Kibul Torah and Sinai, and then he passes it on to Yeshua. Yeshua is the kingdom, etc., etc. All right. Now, take the first point. First point is, now everybody wants his children to see them. If it was up to Moshe, would he have appointed Yeshua? Would he? No. He wanted his own kids. But that wasn't what Hashem wanted. So the end, the leader of the Jewish people after Moshe was Yeshua. And not Moshe's kids. That itself tells us about the tradition. The tradition of Judaism was Al Pi Masora, Al Pi Hashem. And therefore, there are things that play out in halacha that would never appear logical to anybody, and so on. All right, now, if we look at the Mishnah again, let's go over those words once more. All right, I'm going to read the words of the Mishnah, and then let me see how it's standing here. Okay. Moshe Kibel Torah Mitzina. All right. First question. Moshe, what kind of Moshe? Not Moshe Rabbeinu, not Rabbeinu Moshe. He didn't have smicha. Why was he called Moshe? Moshe Rabbeinu, and what did he keep on Torah Sinai? He didn't get the Torah from Sinai, he got the Torah from Hashem. He got it on Sinai, that's true. It was on Sinai. So what's the first question? Moshe keep on Torah Sinai. So here the many before I should make the same point, of course, that the Pirkei is one thing. You can't put any human being physically born, biologically born human being, in the same category as Hashem. Can't compare. You don't even try to compare. In other words, Hashem is Hashem. Hashem is without a goof. Hashem is eternal. Hashem is forever and ever and beyond any human comprehension. No human being can understand him totally. We can understand sparks of the divine, but not Hashem totally. And at the same time, no human being can converse with Hashem as an equal. There's no such thing as a Talmud Rebbe relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can have that with people, and not with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, totally beyond it all. So the Mishnah begins by saying, Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. He's called Moshe, not Rabbeinu Moshe, and he got the Torah from Sinai. Why is he called Moshe, not Moshe Rabbeinu? Because Moshe Rabbeinu really believed that the reason why he was picked to be the translator of the Torah was because he was a nobody. He really believed he was humble. Of course, we know that humble doesn't mean inferior. No, if Moshe Rabbeinu would have thought he was inferior, he could hardly have gone up to Sinai, brought down the Torah. He could hardly have went into another world and been with Hashem for 40 days, etc. So it doesn't mean that he thought he was worse than everybody else. But he really believed he was an ordinary human being, right? And therefore, and he also he was aware that he was a person who had no ego, that he was aware of. A person without ego is entitled to know he has no ego, because it takes a lot of work to stay that way. It's not a simple state. So Moshe Rabbeinu knew, and he really believed that the reason why Hashem chose him as the Mikabel Torah is because he was like Sinai. Why did Sinai believers he were called? You know what Sinai said? Sinai said the Torah was given on Har Sinai. Why? Because of its lack of elevation. It wasn't a tall mountain. It wasn't Everest. It was Sinai. And so Moshe figured that because he just tries to be Sinai himself in life, successfully, Baruch Hashem, therefore he was chosen. So therefore he really gave the credit to him of all of achievements as a gift from Hashem because he was Onoch Mikol Olam, because he managed to have humility. Okay. Now, interesting, I want to add a word to this over here. I used to repeat this about 30, 40 years ago. It's a long time ago. You remember, I'm sure that you heard of it, but if you don't remember it, there was a chap called Meir Kahana. Meir Kahana was American born. He lived in the United States. He made Aliyah. And of course, he was the head of what was the group called? Meir Kahana, the head of, he put the for Russian Jewry and all those things, and he was assassinated. He was killed killed the Yisrael. He had a record, a tape. And on that tape, which I remember listening to in his voice, he said, the Torah was given in Har Sinai because Har Sinai wasn't elevated. It wasn't Mount Everest. He says, but if there is such a big deal in being humble, etc., and not being elevated, why wasn't the Torah given in a valley? Who needed a mountain altogether? Like Har Sinai, a valley, a big valley. The answer is, he says, you're not supposed to be that small. You're not supposed to be thinking of yourself as that small that people can walk on you. If they step all over you, then you're not a person. And that was the charge of his belief. Jews have to stand up for their right. He had all these protests, etc., As he once told Rabbi Holler and I, when we visited him in jail, he was in jail in America for a couple of years, and he was such a fighter for his rights that they kept him in a old disused hotel in New York, and he was the only person there. And they kept him there because he insisted. He's got to walk to shul every day. He's got to be able to have his kashrus, his meals, kosher kitchen. And so they kept an old hotel going. Rabbi Hamid and I spent the day with him, and he said that he took his son for a mechina to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He wanted to show off he had a very clever son, he lived in Binyamin. And he says, and Moshe Feinstein said to his son, he says, you can listen to Gedolim a little better than your father. There's no problem with that. Your father won't have a problem with that either. Right? So this was Meir Kahana, and that's what he said. If you go all around your son, it shouldn't be given in the valley. It wasn't given in the valley, it means you're not supposed to be stepped on. And he said that's an interpretation of Moshe Kibbutz Torah in Sinai. Okay. So Yeshua, there's a Canaan and Vim. Okay. Now the word Sarua, it normally means, and I said this the other day, I think, that Moshe Kibbel, Moshe could not receive what Hashem could give him because he was human. He was a person. So Moshe couldn't say Hashem Bosar Torah Moshe, or Hashem Nosan Torah Moshe, because it was impossible. It was impossible for Hashem to give the total Torah of his being wasn't transferable to a human being. And in fact, I said the other day that the Chazal tell us Moshe Rabbeinu also learned, because Baruch learned it. There's something called Torah Hashem that Hashem learned to himself. No human being could possibly conceive that. That's totally beyond the realm of any human mind. Hence, Hashem couldn't give Moshe his total being. What could he give him? But Moshe could receive. That's kibbel. What is clay kibbel? What is receptive vessels could receive? That's what he could get. What he couldn't get. Okay. But then when it came, when Moshe taught Yeshua, he tried to give him everything he had, and he did. He succeeded. When the Rebbe is Moshe and the Talmud is Yeshua, you have Mesirah. You can hand over the whole tradition. The Rebbe's king, the student is king, and then it goes on to say that not only was Moshe to Yeshua, but Yeshua to Canaan. There too, the handing over was total. You don't use the word. You don't use the word Mesirah, but no word comes to the same thing. As it came into the Nevi'im, each one managed to hand over the entire Torah knowledge and Torah understanding they had. And then the Nevi'im did the same thing. The Nevi'im did the same thing to the Anshin, which was a separate group of people, which I mentioned to you before. And you have Pharaoh Wine's notes. I want to just take a second. The 120 Talmidim of the Anshin, they took place at the beginning of the Second Temple era. Beginning of the Second Temple era, the end of Nevi'im, and beginning of the Tanoim of the Mishnah. They included the last Nevi'im, among them Ezra, Mordechai, from the Megillah, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. Right? We talked about it last week, that they were the ones who restored there was a new sounds from a verse. They restored the Torah to its Lioshna. So they returned to Hashem the crown, which was Hashem. When Rosh Yeshiva called Hashem, which we say today in Davening, we use those words. In the interim period, Daniel and Uriah took out two of the words. They said, we're being stepped on by the whole world. How can you call them Gibor? Where's the Gibor of Hashem? They took it out. Nora, how can you say Nora? So they took out two of these titles, and we used to praise Hashem and the Edom Show, and I said, without it. Came the answer, they said, no. They said, the fact that we are surviving today, that's why I said it in the Hirsch's name, if you remember. The fact that we are surviving, that's the greatest miracle of all. In other words, the Torah is telling us this isn't the only goals. There are going to be many, many goals for the next thousands of years, and we're going to survive it. And because of that survival, we say, okay, they returned the two titles, which is what we've done to this day. This is expressing the praise of Hashem as they said it. And they said it because they restored what Shavenu himself had written in his day. Now, of those people, the leader of them was Ezra. Ezra was, of course, the Navi too. And the Gemara says that Ezra was so worthy that the Torah hadn't been given to Moshe Rabbeinu, it would have been given to Ezra. He could have been the head of the Torah, etc., but the Torah had been given already to Moshe, and so on. All right. And the Yeshiva said, as you know, they created an infrastructure that prepared us for the Golah for the next thousands of years. If we survive the Golah, it's because of the structures introduced by Anshei Adam. Now, I don't know if I mentioned a minute ago, I think I was going to. I think it was my first mention. The mere fact that Moshe Rabbeinu, I did say it, Moshe Rabbeinu did not appoint his sons, it was the way. You may still want your kids to take care of, but it was not Moshe, it was not Hashem. Hashem was calling it. Hashem, who the next generation of leadership is. And Yeshua was praised loud by he was a servant of Moshe who stood by Moshe for a lifetime, who learned everything he knew from Moshe, how to behave himself. Shimushish or Torah, it's called. How does a Jew behave? He needed Rebbe for that too. And because of Yeshua's total commitment to Moshe, he was chosen to be the heir of Moshe. Right. And actually, as I said before, what's the time like?
5:35.
What time do we have? All right.
We've got till 2:45 if anybody's interested.
What time is it now?
Now it is
4:30.
4:30.
We've got until
What?
2:45.
Let's take 10 more minutes.
Tell me when it's 5 minutes before I should finish. All right. Now, the Anshei Knesset Learner, as I said before, the Anshei Knesset Learner, they're the ones who developed the structure of Yiddishkeit that we have to this day. They told us everything we know. They told us how to daven. What do you know how to daven? We daven Shachris, Mincha, Mariv. They're the ones who told us to do it. We make Kiddush Friday night. They told us. We do Havdalah. They told us. The structure of Judaism, as we know, the mitzvahs, etc., was put together by the Anshei Knesset, of course, according to the tradition and the Messiah that preceded them. And their influence in Torah Shabbat was absolute. I saw over here an interesting comment to the name of Aaron Kotler. Aaron Kotler said, we started off with the first year, what's the connection between Torah Shabbat and Torah Shabbat? Torah Shabbat is a Chumash. The 5 books of Moses, the Kalisha Chumash Torah. Torah Shabbat is everything besides that. Everything that we call Mishnah, Gemara, Medrash, etc., it's called Torah Shabbat. And it says Aaron Kotler, interesting thing. He says, look at a map. If you look at a map and you're looking for New York City, it's a huge city, and when people live in New York. So if you look at a map of the world, New York City is a dot. That's all. You can learn nothing about New York City from seeing it on a world map. If you look at a country map or a state map, New York City is another world. So the Torah Shebiksav, without the Torah Shebapeh, is a world map. You don't know where you're going. You have no clue where anything is. You don't know what else film. What else film? And you have parashas. What do you do with those parashas? Where do you put them? In a box. As it turned out, we know it has to be a black box. Who says black? Why can't you have colorful blacks? People have colorful talism, but nobody has colorful film. Halacha Yeshiva Sinai. These are the people who gave us the intrinsic values that we practice to this day, and that is called living halacha. Living halacha today was started by Antonis Adela, who did so much for people. As I said to you the other day, one of the great miracles of them, 120 people, and what they told us in the next mission, Hey Mamrud, was unanimous. They decided that there are three things that had to be given over to the next generation, and all three agreed. Three agreed, these are the three things, and nothing else was a miracle. That was a miracle too. And I also mentioned, and I'm sure you remember, that there's a difference of opinion whether they were replaced as they aged and left the world. One opinion said it was the war, so they were around for a long time. Others says no. There were one group of 120 leaders, and as they passed away, they should not filled. And so after that came the next generation, students of the Antonis Adela, the remnant, and so on. And so in the next Mishnah will tell us all about these people, what they were about. Now, the two things I wanted to do, I wanted to share with you one of the important commentaries on Pirkei among the Rishonim is Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah is a Rishon, and I wanted to share with you a few ideas about who he is, because according to a savior that I'm going to quote to you, he was a Rishon, but he was the Rishon who really was the expert of Pirkei. When you refer to Rabbeinu Yonah, it's not another commentary. He was 12th century, was a Rishon, Rashi, Rambam, Rashba, all those people. But he stood out on his own. His commentary is regarded as something very special. And there's a translation into English written by your cousin. Your cousin once he ruled. His wife is Bela Haber, Bela Panikov. It's Mendel Panikov's daughter. And Rabbi Haber is a brilliant Talmud Chacham, a student of Rabbi Scheinberg of Yeshiva Harav, who wrote his own story on Pirkei and other things. And I wanted to share his introduction about Rabbeinu Yonah to you, but I will leave that for next time. So we still have a few minutes. Let me share with you a quick thought about shiurs, since we're here. I shared this with my brother governors the other day. Shiurs, okay. Some people you know everybody say what shiurs is. Zman Matan Torah Seinu. Right? Tomorrow night we're going to sit down in Johannesburg and we're going to celebrate Zman Matan Torah Seinu, the time of the giving of the Torah. Best way we know how to celebrate that is by learning Torah, because that's what it's all about. The engine that drives Klal Yisrael is the Torah. Without the Torah, we're not a Klal Yisrael. Without the Torah, we lack the spark. We lack the divine connection. We lack the connection to Hashem. It is through the Torah that we are Bnei Yisrael. Through the Torah, we have those midas that we're talking about in Pirkei. So let's take a note. I made an observation the other day when I introduced the meeting that let's go back to the first Matan Torah. The first Matan Torah, called the Sinai 1. Sinai 1 took place in the year 2448 after creation. In other words, it's over 3,300 years ago. Well, over close to 3,500 years ago. And now here we are coming to Sinai this year. Tomorrow night is Sinai 5780, and this is the year 2020. Okay, quite a while, quite a while of time passed in between them. Right. Now we talked about Chazal. It's an interesting thing that when the first luchos were given, when Sinai 1 took place, to say the Chazal, the world was in a state of absolute silence. The world went quiet. What does it say? Not a sound was heard. Not a sound of shovel coal. No sound was heard. A bird didn't chirp. A dog didn't bark. A lion didn't roar. Nature was totally quiet. Totally quiet. And then came the sound of Hashem saying, that changed the world forever and ever, which is Revelation at Sinai, Kabbalah Satorah. Now, interesting. So that was Sinai 1. Now here we come to Sinai 2, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a similar world. We find ourselves believing out in a world which is not dissimilar to Sinai 1. What do we see? We're looking around today, and guess what? We look around and the world is silent. The Jewish world is silent. There's not a shul open in the whole world. There's not a yeshiva open where people are sitting and learning. There's not a beis medrash, which people as usual. We don't have the normal guests from all over the world coming to our Tikkun Leil tomorrow night. We don't have the passion shiur given by a local rabbanim, by guests overseas. So it's a world of silence. It is silence similar to the silence of Sinai. And we're waiting to hear Hashem Elokecha. We're waiting to hear something. Oh, no, we don't know what we want to hear. We're going through this Mageifa, this terrible plague, which unfortunately is the murder of human lives. And as all of our rabbanim say, it comes from Hashem. We're not blaming anybody. We can't blame anybody. We blame the Chinese. Hold on. Okay. Sorry about that. We know nobody. We know where it comes from. We don't know why. We don't know why, and we're going to know why. My Rosh Yeshiva's youngest son, Rabbi Yomin Saratsky, was a great Talmud Chacham who lives in the United States. He gave a brilliant shiur, which I'm not going to go into, but this is what he said. When do you think was the last time when the Jewish world closed down as it is now? When was the last time this ever happened? Of course, not in human memory. Nobody doesn't remember that. But he suggests it might have been Noah's time. It might have been the generation of the Mabul, which would make it 4,125 years ago. Over 4,000 years ago could be maybe the last time when the world was so small that if you had a couple of us from Jerusalem and they weren't working, so you were in the same position you are today. But never happened. Never happened. And we're trying to work out why it happened. We don't know. So what I mentioned the other day was, why when the Torah was given at Sinai, what was that silence necessary for? Why did you need a quiet world? Why did you need a quiet world where not a bird chirped, not a dog barked? What was that for? And the answer is, this has been said over the generations, the answer is that when Hashem is about to give the world a program which will change the world forever, a life changer for individuals, for communities, for people, and for the world as a whole, a world of Torah, a world with a new dimension called Torah. You need to have an absolute silence. In other words, no distraction. Everything is a distraction. We're distracted by everything. We're sure not, but we are, of course. And in order to focus, to try to begin to understand what does it mean to have a Torah? What does it mean to have a Torah? What does it mean to live in a world without the Torah? Can't do that. You need to be able to focus on that on its own, that you need silence. Everything has to go into abeyance. Everything goes into the background. That's what happened at Sinai. Now we're in the same boat today. We need to find the opportunity somehow to work out and to understand why this is happening. We won't know that. that only Hashem knows that. We pray to Hashem, B'chazdecho, Hosem Yimenu, Hosem Yisonam Agef Azois, take this plague away. Without to Hashem, Hoseh, we know you can. We know it's in your hands to do it. Please take it away from us. But at the same time, it is an opportunity to think. It's an opportunity to focus. It's an opportunity when you're not being distracted. And we're trying to give this a shot to the extent that we can. What is this all about? What is this gift Hashem gave us, a Torah? Where would we be without it? We would not be close to it. Wouldn't be us. Wouldn't be our families. Wouldn't be our people. And these are the thoughts that we should consider. And I wish the entire family, all of you, have a good job. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dad. Thank you very, very much.
Next
Thank
year,
Thanks, Dad. That was beautiful. Thank you, Dad.
Thank you.
next year,
Thank you.
Monday, 4 o'clock.
When Monday?
Monday, 4 o'clock.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
All right, we carry on.
Hi, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Ziedy.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you guys. Have a good
Bye.
Yom
Thanks for coming.
Wherever you are, have a nice Yom
Thank you, Dad. Love you. Bye.
Thank you. Good Yom Tov.
I'll speak to you before you answer. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Think so.
Bye-bye. That was a shiur.
Beautiful.
Hmm?
Beautiful. It was beautiful.
Well, wasn't boring.
Thank you, Ziedy. We
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed.
Thank. Oh, how you doing?
Baruch Hashem. Dasa also listened in today.
Oh, did she?
She did. I've got all the recordings. I see Alon wants them.
Okay, but don't give me the originals.
No, I'm going to. I'll edit them before I give them to him.
Okay, go do things. And I told him I wanted to broadcast it. Not giving that many to the shul, so let's put this out.
So what I'll do is I'll edit all the family out, and then it'll just be you, and you'll be able. It's basically
Whatever you want.
the shiur.
Yeah, that's it. Whatever
Okay.
you want. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so we will talk again soon, okay?
We will. It's Hashem. I'll call you. Thank you.
Okay.
I still have your book. I know you want it back, but I'm enjoying it a bit.
It's very fascinating. And he normally wasn't long-winded. There wasn't a long-winded guy.
I'm not going to lie. I do like that he doesn't just focus on the guy.
All right, fair enough. That's every power. Every power.
I'm joking. I'm saying. He doesn't, but I was just saying. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Love you
Aaron.
guys.
Bye.
Thanks for your help.
Bye.
Thank you.